My pleasure to welcome to the Rhema studio Reverend Frank Ritchie. Frank, kia ora, so nice to see you.
Kia ora, Andrew. Nice to be in studio.
Yeah, no, it does make a change. Now, the many hats of Frank Ritchie, something I wanted to focus on at the beginning, and we were talking about this last time we were chatting, actually, via Zoom, that there's this new area that you've leapt into in Substack, a way of getting some views, some opinions, adding to the conversation. What's that looking like for you, Frank?
It's looking good. I mean, it's born out of the fact that I love writing.
Yeah.
I used to be a blogger way back in the day when blogs were all the rage. And then social media came around and I fell in love with social media. But I think it's fair to say I've fallen out of love with social media because of the nature of the conversation. It gets very adversarial.
Yeah.
And Substack is like old school blogging, but now people can pay a small fee to be part of it, which just keeps the trolls out because trolls don't pay. So it means the conversation's different.
It's a community you invite people into and have some worthwhile conversations about some important points.
Yeah.
Talking politics today, and I don't know, there's lowest common denominator, kind of the TikTok politics, and especially some things that have been happening recently, perhaps the minor parties wanting to get a little bit more headlines as well. Talk to us about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, this for me, I posted something on Facebook on this one. This for me was sparked by David Seymour's response to his critics when it comes to the Regulatory Standards Bill.
Yep.
And I don't want to talk about the bill. I don't know enough about the bill, but I have an aspiration for how I want our politicians to act, because I think how people act in Parliament leads the nation. There's something shown that can give an indication to other people about how we should act. And David Seymour has leaned into talking to about his academic critics in particular as having Regulatory Standards Bill derangement syndrome, which comes from the idea of Trump derangement syndrome in the United States, which goes back to Bush derangement syndrome back in 2003. And there's just so much of me that hopes for better from our politicians, whether it be on ACT's side of the aisle or when we move over to the other side of the aisle. We seem to have a lot of activists in Parliament at the moment. And look, in public discourse, there's a place for anger. There's a place for how the public might choose to have a go at each other. But I aspire for better from our politicians.
Is there a different standard, do you think? Because, I mean, David Seymour's got a bit of a reputation of stunts like driving tractors up the steps of Parliament, etc. And as the leader of, a smaller party within Parliament, with some would say a disproportionate balance of power in the coalition arrangement, he needed to do stunts like this in order to get the oxygen. But now he's, not only Deputy Prime Minister, but acting Prime Minister at the moment. Should the standards of discourse rise? Do you think, should we expect more from our acting Prime Minister, somebody who's no longer just the leader of a minor party?
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made that it's understandable for smaller parties in Parliament to ruffle feathers in order to get noticed in a world of headlines where those are going to grab headlines. But yeah, I think once you're a Deputy Prime Minister, there's just something different demanded of you. I think you need to step above the fray and understand that your job is to take people with you. Your job is to lead the country, not to get yourself involved in fights. And I'd be demanding that or wanting that of whoever was in that position, whether they be left, right, Te Pāti Māori, ACT, whoever was in there, I'd be hoping for it. Same with Winston. I think Winston every now and then dives into populism a little too easily. And I've got to admit, I know that I'm somewhat engaging in wishful thinking here, that it's not the age that we live in, but I think if we just simply give in to that and we don't demand better from our politicians, then I think we get into a depressing space.
Yeah, and I suppose that whole TikTok politics, that 15 seconds of fame now rather than 15 minutes, grabbing that headline, and sometimes that's all you need to grab, even if the headline, which is the case for the David Seymour article that you're looking at, the headline is something totally different than the substance of the article, but nobody goes beyond the headline anyway because it takes more than 3 minutes to read, right?
Yeah, because sadly nobody's going to take notice of what would be the better approach, which would be, I would imagine, if David said something to his critics like, hey, I hear what you're saying and I see how you get there and here's how I see it.
Yeah.
But of course that doesn't doesn't get headlines.
It doesn't, and to be fair, Frank, that sounds like something a media advisor would tell him to say. Something else that I wanted to pick up on with David Seymour is something that he's been doing for a while now, this David versus the media, where he runs a camera on any interviews that he agrees to with the mainstream media, and then has a huge following in the social media of playing the behind-the-scenes footage of what the media was actually like. And it's this kind of dialogue of saying, you can't trust the mainstream media and they're all out to get us, and I'm the only politician who's standing up against them. I mean, that's quite a compelling and engaging dialogue, but it's an interesting strategy because it's kind of like making enemies with the people who can give you the publicity.
Yeah, I think this is complex because the media largely, and I speak as a media chaplain here, and someone who's well across the media landscape in New Zealand, the media understands that they've largely lost the trust of the public and that there's a responsibility to get it back. And I think David Seymour and others are leaning into that distrust and continuing to almost drive the knife in. And I think there are long-term consequences to that. If as a nation we completely lose our trust in those who are sharing information and we only go to sources that agree with us, I think we're going to face a very real problem. But the challenge is not just for David Seymour there, it's for the media as well to think about how they get that trust back.
And honestly, I suppose what I think people like about it is instead of the media being able to control that situation, instead of the media being able to say, we will choose which sound bites will make the 6 o'clock news, the unedited version of that conversation is available. The way in which people consume media is different, and maybe people who are in editorial positions within the media are no longer the gatekeepers of the version of the news stories that they used to be, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think there's real value in that. There's real value in someone like David Seymour getting a whole interview filmed and putting it out there.
Yeah.
But he came in very combative.
Yes.
And that's where the problem is for me. The undermining of the trust, driving the trust down even lower, rather than going, hey, there are alternative ways to do this. Let's make sure we put it all out, which I think he could make a case for that to the media that they would agree with.
Yeah, certainly. But, I mean, hey, a lesson that he's possibly learnt from the media. Hopefully. If it's got a bit of conflict, if it's got a bit of argy-bargy, if there's a few swear words chucked around in the opening sentence or two of the conversation, then it's going to get likes. It's something which is likely to blow up on the socials, and that's actually the result that he's looking for in this regard.
I think this comes back to those of us who just are opening the pages and we're clicking on the stuff. I think there's a responsibility that lies with us there, because social media and its algorithms are built to dive into our base instincts, and it rewards conflict. So if you put an argy-bargy, slightly heavy comment online, you're probably going to get noticed more than something that's a little more benign, a little wiser. You'll get other people responding, and so it tells you that this is how you should behave. So we can help by not engaging in that way and with that stuff.
And hey, it's kind of in the brand. It's in the headline. David versus the media.
Yes.
You know, he has to be on the opposite side of this regard. But I do love the fact that he's another example of the Deputy Prime Minister using a biblical metaphor in the way in which he markets himself and his views. So hey, maybe there's things that we can pray for in that space. Frank, appreciate your wisdom and insight as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.